Because if you want to get a straight guy mad, just start accusing him of being gay. Now, every man in this room knows what I'm saying. And don't you know that is exactly what Goliath was doing, calling them a bunch of girly boys. Now, you girls may doubt me, but every guy in this room knows I'm telling the truth. That's exactly what he was calling them. You all are a bunch of girly boys. And I can just imagine how demoralized those Israelite soldiers were when little David comes on the scene. And they had been suffering from this verbal and emotional and psychological abuse twice a day for over a month now. But Goliath is asking for more than he's bargained for. Because Jehovah God is going to give Goliath a man, all right. But it won't be just any old man. God's going to let Goliath come in contact with an anointed man. God's special man. A man after God's own heart. And in verse 17, Father Jesse asked his son David to go see how his brothers are faring in the valley of Elah. And he tells him to take with him, some parched corn and some 10 loaves of bread and go see how his boys were doing. Oh, they'll sure love some home cooking. Now, David's job here is only in a supportive role. Jesse also needs 10 little cheeses for the captain to help his boys stay in good graces with their superior officer. Then in verse 18, Father Jesse says, look how thy brethren fare and take their pledge. In other words, bring back some assurance to me that they're doing all right. Now, this is where the story gets exciting. Because young David loves adventure. I mean, this is army. This is war stuff. This is men. This is battle. You know, guy stuff. So the next morning, David is up with the sun. And he heads to the valley of Elah, the big battlefield. Oh boy, he's going to see a fight today. Now I know you ladies don't understand this, but there's something about guys. We want to see that kind of stuff. It's just in us. If there's a fight going on, we want to see it. Now, there are men that will tell you girls that they don't want to see a fight. And if you ever hear someone say, there's a fight, they say, we'll run the other way. Ladies, just let me tell you something. If any man ever tells you that when he hears fight, he runs the other way, if he tells you that, then he will lie to you about anything. Because there's just something in guys that, did somebody say there was a fight? Was there a wreck? Did somebody say fire? Man, let's go see it. It's just a guy thing. Did you ever notice that boys, they're always punching each other and pulling and yanking one another? That's just boys. Don't get upset, Mama. That's just the way boys act. And they are doing that all the time. They're wrestling and jumping out of trees on each other and carrying on with one another because they like drama and action, adventure. And you see, a battle has all that. So David comes to Elah expecting a battle. But when he gets to the battlefield, he doesn't see any battle or any fighting going on. Or even that any fighting has been done. Now all he hears is just a bunch of people shouting and moaning around. And he says, this is the stupidest battle I ever saw. True, at 16, he hasn't seen many battles. But he's heard about a lot of battles. And this wasn't sure like any that he had ever heard about. Everything looks so silly with the Philistines on one side of the valley shouting insults and calling the Israeli soldiers bad names and things about their mothers. And then to hear his soldiers and brothers turning around and shouting the same childish things back at the Philistines, and everybody just calling each other names. David thought it was like a big playground out there rather than a battlefield. Just the time he started to laugh, he heard a voice that made the ground shake. And there stood big Goliath, beginning one of his tirades. And it says there in verse 24 that all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. Bless their heart, there's nothing worse than a bunch of men who are helpless. And I can't think of helping of the dear men on hijacked planes when they're helpless to defend themselves against the terrorist. It has got to be one of the most emasculating experiences in the known world. And then a 16-year-old little brother David walks up. Hi, guys! What's all the commotion? And they respond in verse 25. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up? And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. So do you understand what the offer is here? King Saul says, whoever will kill Goliath will, number one, first become a very wealthy man. Secondly, he will be allowed to marry the king's daughter. And in those days, that was a very tremendous honor, regardless of how lovely she was on the outside or the inside. And number three, the man's family would be tax exempt for the rest of their lives. Now, folks, that's pretty good incentive. And David listens to all of that, and in verse 26 he says to those around him, making sure he hears it all, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You see, all of us have a picture in our mind at this moment. David has got the truth picture in his mind. David sees reality. And here's the difference between the army of Israel and young David. Those soldiers of Israel had Goliath on their mind, but David had God on his mind. The army of Israel was giant dominated, but David was God dominated. The Israeli army is looking at Goliath and saying, look how much bigger he is than any of us. But David is looking at Goliath and saying, look how much smaller he is than God. Well, folks, the question is, what kind of God do you have? What kind of picture is in your brain? The picture of your giant or the picture of your God? Are you a giant-dominated person or are you a God-dominated person? Is your God a living God or a dead God? Is your God a giant-fearing God? Or is your God a giant-killing God? How real is your God to you? Is He really, truly real to you? Or are you just all talk?